Hey, history peeps. I'm in the front yard today. It could be too loud, so we'll have to see how it goes. I do have notes, so I'm going to look down every once in a while. Hope you guys are doing well. I thought with this round, which is essentially week, I don't know, 5,000 in quarantine, that we would do short videos about each question because if you're like me at this point, you can't concentrate for very long. So I'll try to stay on topic, which I know is not my strong point, and hope that a bird does not come and poop on me while I talk to you. Also, it is possible one of my neighbors will come over and say, like, hey, what are you doing? Um, but I've lived here a while, so they know I'm not quite right. Also, the computer's on the PEC electrical box, so as long as I don't think we'll get shocked. I think everything will be fine. All right. So it's the 1960s. Not everything you heard about the 60s is true, by the way. Not everybody went to Woodstock. Not everybody was on drugs. Um, the first part of the 60s was very, very conservative. And if you study JFK, who was conservative and not so much, especially in the married life part, you will notice that he ran as what would now be a very conservative Republican. But that's also because that's an era where we still hated evil, godless communism, and we needed to show that we were tougher than anybody else, because that's changed a lot since then. I forgot to point out too that today's videos, I'll try to wear a different college shirt, and I'll try to wear a shirt from places I went. This one's from Georgetown University, where I did actually go to college for a little while. I didn't get kicked out or anything. It was just part of the fellowship. And then when it was over, I returned to the very fine institution of Texas State. Now, JFK also went to Georgetown. What a great connection I have with JFK. That's honestly about it. But JFK is a super smart dude from a wealthy family who maybe earned their money in a little sketchy sort of way, but it wasn't his fault because he's not the one who earned the money. Now, the question you have to answer is about foreign policy. So let's talk about foreign policy with JFK. One of the things you'll notice if you study foreign policy in the 60s, that guy did look at me funny, is Republicans and Democrats are not dramatically different. We both want to make sure, or both groups wanted to make sure, we had enough stuff to blow up the Soviets more times than they could blow us up. We were still really acting in that mutually assured destruction kind of way. And we were not quite ready to de-escalate the Cold War. You'll be shocked at who really kind of does that because it's Nixon, which is weird. Okay, so the question you have to answer is about JFK and foreign policy initiatives. So specifically what I've asked you about: Peace Corps, Alliance for Progress, Bay of Pigs, and Cuban Missile Crisis. So we'll start with Peace Corps. Now, one of the things that JFK noticed is that our public persona, United States public persona, was not necessarily positive because, we were kind of reminding the Soviets we could blow them up more than they could blow us up. So we wanted to improve our image overseas, and both the Peace Corps and Alliance for Progress were plans to do that. The Peace Corps was to send out our coolest folks, yes, the young college people, the people you're about to be, to the rest of the world so they could do good works. So this is where we sent the college kids, and they went to what we would have called third world countries during that time period. Now we just might call them developing countries, or I'm not sure, but countries with smaller economies and maybe that had less technology. And we sent young people to those places to help build water supplies or clinics or schools or things like that. And you might think of those as similar to mission kind of trips, but they were from the US government. Now, if you're wondering what would college kids get out of this, well, the chance to do something good and to portray the United States in a positive way. Also, they may get a better chance at government jobs or some scholarships later or something along those lines. If you're wondering, was that a fairly popular program? It was. It's still available to you. I've had a few students do it. I've had colleagues that have done this before. By 1966, perhaps the most important year in U.S. history or world history for that matter, because, yeah, I was born that year. About 15,000 folks participated in that construction. Don't worry if you hear all those noises. Oh my gosh, they're always building stuff in Leander, aren't they? Okay, so Peace Corps really did put our best foot forward with the young folks and was probably pretty helpful and a fairly positive thing. Alliance for Progress, pretty similar, but the business side of that. So this is where we had our larger businesses go and build electric grids or water supplies or things like that to help in countries where maybe they needed and assist building up their infrastructure. And I don't know, do you talk about infrastructure? Those are things like roads and buildings and systems, water cleaning systems, trash systems, um, things, medical systems. Uh, During this time period, we're help promoting vaccines throughout the world as well, which I know some people are now opposed to, but I bet they're not so much anymore, are they? But there were lots of good things that happened through the Alliance for Progress as well. And part of the reason we did this was to make big business look more positive as well. And you may have noticed that during this era, which is a little traumatic and exciting, it's not as fun to live through history as you thought it would be, is it? There are some corporations who are being really helpful in developing products and doing things voluntarily, maybe because they're afraid that if they don't do it voluntarily, they'll get told to do it. But you've also noticed, my goodness, Texas HEB, is there a better corporation? They're paying their workers more. Oh, they're doing delivery service for older and sicker folks. So some corporations really are incredibly positive. And I think the Alliance for Progress gave American corporations the chance to highlight that as well. Um, Other foreign policy stuff that you'll notice mentioned that I didn't mention in the question, which of course you can add. Um, Eisenhower was supposed to meet with Khrushchev in Berlin, and then he decided not to do this because of the U-2 incident where we were spying and Francis Gary Powers and that kind of thing. So he said, you know what, I'm not going to meet with Eisenhower, wait for the new guy. And part of his thought was, the new guy won't be as good at this, so I'll go meet with the new guy and I can get one over on him. Well, the new guy was super young and kind of inexperienced. That was JFK. And he went over to the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, and apparently, maybe, I don't know, said he was a jelly donut, but he said, Ich ein Berliner, and I don't speak any German, so I'm sure I butchered that, which either means, I'm a Berliner or I'm a jelly donut with the nickname of a Berliner. I think people understood what he was trying to say. I mean, when his first language, we got to be nice about that, right? Um, but he also then pledged to spend billions more on defense. And then Khrushchev said, then what is there to talk about? So called off the peace talks. And then we had two very unusual foreign policy incidents with our friends, or not so much our friends, in Cuba. Now, Cuba had had a revolution in 1959. A fellow named Fidel Castro overthrew this fellow named Bautista, who was our dictator. We set him up, so he was a good dictator because he did the stuff we asked him to do. Which occasionally, I mean, he was a dictator, so if you spoke out against him, he might throw you in jail, which did happen quite a bit. So people seem to get frustrated with that lack of freedom and freedom of speech, that sort of thing. So they overthrew him, and they had a very young, idealistic um, leader, Fidel Castro. And he said, we're not going to do elections right away, but we'll get to them, which he never actually did, which kind of made him a dictator as well. Well, when he makes his first trip to the United Nations, we host that thing in New York City. When he made his first trip to the United Nations, he decided he would hang out with Khrushchev, and he aligned himself more with communists. So then we said, oh my gosh, he is evil and godless. So then we did a boycott of Cuba, and we had done a lot of business there before, and people went there on vacations and that sort of thing. So then they decided they'd be all buddy-buddy with the Soviet Union. Well, we were spying on them one day, and oh gosh, I'm skipping ahead. We need to go Bay of Pigs first, then we'll go Cuban Missile Crisis. So Bay of Pigs happens in '61. It's one of the first big foreign policy incidents with JFK. And what happens there, he inherits a plan to overthrow Castro. And we have CIA trained Cuban revolutionaries who are exiled, and we train them in Nicaragua, I believe it is. So we're going to drop them off on the beach at the Bay of Pigs, and they're going to run in with U.S. air support, and they're going to go to Havana and overthrow Castro. Well, JFK inherits this plan, and he looks at it and he says, that looks like it's not very organic. It looks like we are running this plan. Uh-oh, some neighbors are arguing. It looks like we are running this plan. So he says, let's do it, but let's take away the air support. So they took away the air support, and then everybody who got dropped off, there's like 1,600 folks, everybody who gets dropped off, all the plants in my face, everybody who gets dropped off gets either captured or gets killed. And Castro comes out and makes fun of us, and then JFK has to come give a speech, and he says, the only thing I regret is that it didn't work. Oh, there's the plant again. So then we go like, oh, we knew that JFK guy was kind of a loser. He was a little young, inexperienced. So next time we have an incident with Cuba, he's got to look tough. So the next incident with Cuba is 1963, by the way. And that is the Bay of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay. So Cuban Missile Crisis, we're spying. We notice that the evil, godless communist Soviets are putting in missiles in Cuba, and that's really close to Florida. So JFK, he could call them, he could text them, he could go on Instagram and say like, hey, Fidel. But what he does instead is he goes on TV and says, we have noticed missiles in Cuba that are pointed at the United States, and we will respond with the full force of the U.S. government and military, U.S. military, if they do not remove these missiles. Well, then the whole world freaks out for some reason, because I think we might have just threatened global thermonuclear war, which is how Khrushchev interpreted this as well. And so Khrushchev says, well, fine. And he sends his nuclear subs and his fleet and his military toward Cuba. So now Cuba is getting approached by the U.S. and the evil, godless communists of the Soviet Union. And then behind the scenes, I think it's Robert Kennedy that negotiates a lot of this, even though he's Attorney General. But a lot of folks in the administration kind of call behind the scenes and say, like, hey, let's not blow up the world. And then Khrushchev says, or his people say, if you would take those missiles you have out of Turkey, then we'll take our missiles out of Cuba. And we said, what missiles? We don't have any missiles in Turkey. And then they said, hey, these missiles, and showed pictures. And we said, those are not our missiles. Those belong to NATO. NATO. We don't have anything to do with NATO, except we do run the thing and fund it. And they said, you can take those out. And so we said, okay, we will take the missiles out, but we will never publicly acknowledge that we had the missiles, and you have to publicly acknowledge that you're taking the missiles out of Cuba and that you had them. We will publicly say that we will never try to invade Cuba again. So they said, that's cool. So it all went okay. And then Khrushchev gives a speech like, we're taking the missiles out of Cuba. And the U.S. and we say, yeah, and we'll never try to invade Cuba again. And this looks like a win for, this looks like a win for JFK. Now, it's those Amazon people. Part of what JFK needed to do was he needed to look stronger in the face of the Soviet Union. And Khrushchev didn't care if it looked like he backed down, because he controlled the press in the Soviet Union. So if anybody decided they would go on the news and say, like, Khrushchev's weak, that dude was going to be killed before the evening was over. So Khrushchev didn't have to worry about people complaining about him or talking badly about him. Now, what also happens kind of incidentally in this process is Fidel Castro notices, nobody really cares about him. The Soviet Union, who were supposed to be his buddies, were very, very willing to have his whole nation blown off the map to prove a point. So what he will start to do for his country is to start looking for more regional allies. Now, he still needs the Soviet Union because they buy stuff and they send him money and they give him military stuff. But he also knows that can't be his whole group of buddies for that time. He's got to look elsewhere. Wow, Wow, the Amazon guy has really loud music. All right, I am done with question 1. I hope you were able to hear this. I'll check the volume before I post it. Enjoy answering question 1, and you'll get a video for question 2 later. Have a good morning, afternoon, whatever you're having. Have a snack. Hopefully the Amazon delivery was for you and it was something good. All right, see you soon.